Hello and welcome to the Phoenix 50 Info Show. I'm your host, Lieutenant Vince Lewis with the Phoenix Police Public Affairs Bureau, once again coming to you from downtown Phoenix at police headquarters. And today, I'm still with the co-host, PIO Sgt. Robert Scherer.
Just the two of us today, boss.
Yeah, we're flying adieu right now, as they say.
I like that.
Hey, in seriousness, I want to talk about a recent development in a very old case, a cold case. And by cold, we've termed cold to mean when does a case go cold?
So a case actually goes cold. It's kind of dependent on the investigator, I'll be honest with you. In this case specifically, this meant so much to the original responding case agent that she didn't let this case go until she retired. That's when this case officially went to a cold case. So it kind of differentiates. Really, it depends on a homicide and how much activities left to do, how many leads there are, and a time frame after, a year and a half or so after a case is no longer actively being worked, if you will. There's no other leads. Everything's exhausted that we can do at that current time, investigation wise.
So these cases, when they go cold, they don't go in a box on a shelf and get forgotten.
No. I mean, they're homicides, the pinnacle of I don't want to say the pinnacle of crime, but investigation wise, it's that peak element within our investigation bureau. So we don't let them go. We always honor those victims. They're no longer here. So we have a cold case unit that's dedicated to those cases, and it's always a good idea to put fresh eyes on any of these. Start from the beginning. Investigative techniques change, technology changes. All of those elements go into that cold case unit, and then ultimately, we get to solve quite a few of them actually.
So active cases. So when an investigative unit takes in active cases, they're stacking up sometimes in the dozens of new cases that appear because we're a large city, top 5 city in the nation.
Right.
The patrol will go out and they'll start the initial work, but oftentimes the patrol is limited in what their resources are and just their time.
Right.
They'll get the initial information, make sure that we preserve the scene, preserve the evidence that can be collected. But after that, the work gets turned over to somebody who has a little bit more time, a little more expertise investigatively to spend on the cases that can be worked. And those go to the detectives. So beyond that, when a detective's talked to everybody that they know of that exists as far as a resource or a witness or victims and what have you, there's no suspect in custody. There's no further developments in this case for right now. That case basically doesn't go dormant. It's just not, there's nothing new being developed on that. And when that takes place for a period, roughly about a year, that's what would be determined to be a cold case. Is that correct?
Right. And we have cold case homicide. There's a element of the Family Investigation Bureau that will have cold case sexual assaults. And it's just those elements of we're not going to give up on these cases. And again, technology is a huge element of this. Our cold case homicide unit relies on being trained and being subject matter experts in all these technological advances that open a lot more doors on these cases that weren't open, say, like this one back in 2005, 2006.
Okay, so we're talking specifically today about a 2005, 2006 case deemed by us, the investigators, as the Baby Skylar case.
Right.
There was the remains of a child, an infant, found in a bathroom at the airport.
Right.
It was discovered on a search for a missing piece of property, and those searchers found the remains, brought it to our attention, launched the investigation. Now, obviously, with the remains, we were able to obtain sample DNA for that victim prior to their being interned. But that launched the case into kind of any number of directions. Like, where do you begin with a top 5 city international airport? So many people coming through on a daily basis, not to mention on a holiday where that number gets, exponentially larger.
Right.
Where does one really begin with that? I'd imagine we look at surveillance. We try to figure out, what flights were coming through, who was on holdover, but I can't imagine the amount of people that could have potentially come into this restroom or had some type of knowledge. Where I know you can't get into specifics that we can't release, but how do you wrap your head around starting an investigation like this one?
I thought about this when I first started looking into this case, when we were prepping what we were doing with it. the amount of just people that's Terminal 4, it's not like it's a small terminal off to the side where a couple hundred people go through. You don't really have time-wise when the last time there was interaction with this garbage can where the, newborn was found, the amount of people that are there, who they are. I mean, I'm sure you have ticketed people, but it was prior to that TSA checkpoint. I mean, there's the amount of people is a number you can't even truly kind of estimate. And that's kind of where you start, especially back in '05. I mean, obviously you're reliant, as we are now on surveillance video. You collect as many names as you can. There were some leads that led to potential places where this individual was staying at that time period. You collect names from that source, and you just try to cross reference as best you can. Um, there was extensive work. This case mattered, and I said it during the press conference. This case touched people in a way that they're never going to forget about this case. From the responding patrol officers to the crime scene techs to these homicide investigators that were clearly touched by this case so much that the group of homicide detectives were the ones that ended up pooling money and buying a headstone for this baby. So it clearly touched them. They put a ton of effort into this case from beginning to end, and even when they retired and it went cold, I mean, it shows you something as a detective, and even as anybody kind of looking at it, there was years of inactivity where this case agent would not let it go. That shows how much it meant to her, from the beginning.
Yeah. So Baby Skylar was located in Sky Harbor at a restroom, deceased, and that launched the investigation. And I'd imagine they'd start with, pulling the security cameras, talking to the ticket agents, looking at the gates around there as a starting point. But and the initial physical evidence that was collected at the time would have been obviously the DNA from the remains of Baby Skylar. But over time, the detective never having given up on this case, always following up on those leads, doing those new interviews. Fast forward 18 years later, the original DNA that we collected has led to an arrest. And you recently gave a press conference in combination with the FBI Violent Crimes Task Force to talk about the developments. Now, what can you tell us? You kind of recap what you told us from the presser.
Yeah. So, like we talked about, technology goes into this, and it's a term, investigative genetic genealogy. And basically, it's a way to kind of identify through an unknown source DNA, develop leads through their genetics, and attempt to identify potentially family members, which is huge in a case like this, to be able to in turn try to identify the mother. Now, this is something that generates more leads. That's what's awesome about this. Us as investigators, we want leads to track down. We want pieces to be able to put together for an investigation. That's what we want. That's what we do. Um, and this kind of cooperation with um, the FBI Violent Crime Task Force allowed us to be able to do that. Generate these leads and get things we can track down, which ultimately led to identifying the mother in this case.
So, talking with PIO Sergeant Rob Scherer about the Baby Skylar case and the recent development, the arrest that was made, suspect identified, located, and being held for extradition and out of state. So, the DNA that was originally collected, I don't imagine it's like there's a DNA machine that we put DNA into and it spits out mother, father, brother,
Right.
sister, uncle, grandparent. But we do get connections. We get people and how they're connected through familial DNA.
Right.
And through that, it just kind of supports what the investigators are either already know or are figuring out on their own through the work on the ground, the footwork that they're putting in.
Right.
So DNA is it a magic solution? Is it a crystal ball, or how does it work to supplement what the officers are figuring out through their own work that they're putting in with records and interviews and so forth?
Yeah.
How does DNA supplement what the detectives know?
So DNA in and of itself is a huge piece of evidence. This specific investigative genetic genealogy never leads to the direct arrest. It's not the pinpoint piece of evidence. In fact, the vast majority of the time, it doesn't necessarily lead to identifying that person that you're looking for. You're looking for that familiar DNA. It then in turn gives you leads to narrow down and get to that suspect. It is highly successful in developing those leads, but it's a culmination. It's always been a puzzle for investigators, whether it's 2024, 2005, 1985. It's always a puzzle of the culmination of all these bits of pieces of evidence, interviews, stuff that happened the first couple days in this investigation is directly connected to stuff that happened in 2022, 2023 that led to this arrest. And that's where that big puzzle piece goes together. None more important than the other. It's the culmination of it all. DNA is a huge element in this case, but there's interviews, there's surveillance video, there's, elements from Sky Harbor Airport that day, elements from potentially where this person stayed. All of those things come together to specifically identify that person and then ultimately, effect an arrest and hopefully prosecute that person.
So let me know if you can answer this, but there was a sketch that was released, a sketch of a potential mother of the child
Right.
that we were looking for, the deceased child that was found at the Sky Harbor Airport in 2005. We named her Baby Skylar. There was a sketch that was provided. Can you tell me about where that sketch came from and what we learned?
So that was actually a sketch that was produced by Parabon Labs, and it was actually from the genetic profile of what they believe the mother to be. So it was kind of pulled from that. We don't specifically have an updated picture of the mother at this point because of certain rules with Washington, the state of Washington, and when they release pictures, but for comparison's sake. But that's how that generated. It's one of the first ones I've seen, to be honest with you. I've been part of that task force and been in investigations for 15 years, and I've never seen that. Usually sketches are our artist puts it together. But in this case, what a cool tool to have to potentially kind of lead investigators to, oh, geez, that has a similar appearance to what genetics say the mother should look like.
Yeah, I've seen it once before. It was used, and we highlighted that during Missing in Arizona Day. One of the prior to COVID, we regularly had recognized Missing in Arizona Day, and one of the cases involved a sketch that was developed through DNA taken from the remains that was found of the unidentified person. So that was a missing persons case. So
Right.
that was the only other time that I've seen it, and I'm sure that there's others.
Right. What
But
a unique tool, though, to be able to use in these cases where you're trying to identify what someone looks like through genetics. Pretty wild.
yeah, it's crazy. So I don't know if you've done this yet or not, but I've done this. I've looked into my familial DNA through a private company to figure out what my genealogy was, and some interesting discoveries, some things that I knew and some things that I didn't know. So, but what to recap, we've found Baby Skylar. We've processed the familial DNA. We created a path to a solution, and from that investigation, we were able to identify and locate mom, the mother of the child.
Right.
So she was contacted. She was out of state when she was contacted?
Yes. Out of state. Yeah.
So through our investigative means, we figured out where she was, reached out, made the interview, and then she made an admission during the interview, and that led to the arrest.
Yeah, there was a portion of that interview that was there was some sort of admission, additional work after that, but ultimately it led to the arrest late last year in the state of Washington. Still waiting on extradition back to the county.
Okay, so then once she comes back, and depending on how things go, hopefully soon we'll have a comparative photo that we can put up and realize the success of this of the sketch, how good they were at predicting how mom actually looks. So interesting. Well, PIO Rops, Sher, thank you for joining us. Thank you for this information. I believe we can go to the Phoenix newsroom to hear a little bit more about this story. You
Absolutely.
go to phoenix.gov/newsroom and click on the police tab. You'll be able to see the headlines there for the stories. And I want to thank you for being my guest.
Yep.
I want to thank the crew here for helping me produce this show. And as always, you can help fight crime in your community by sending tips to Silent Witness. You could potentially earn a cash reward there. Call 480-WITNESS or visit silentwitness.org. Follow us on social media on all platforms. We're there. We're hiring. Go to phoenix.gov/police and learn more, or go to joinphxpd.com. Until next time, remember, we're all in this together.